Welcome back everyone to more NASCAR Heat 3 coverage here at Knee Pit Gaming. Today's setup video takes us to Gateway Motorsports Park, and unfortunately only the trucks run at this particular track. None of the other top two series actually run at this track, which is unfortunate, but it's what we have. And I went ahead and wanted to do this video because it's one of my favorite tracks to run, and I couldn't wait to get out there and run some laps on it. I was able to hook the car up pretty quick at this track and really didn't have to spend a whole lot of time on the setup based on what I've learned from running other tracks, both on the heavy braking type tracks as well as more of the speedway or super speedway type tracks. That's the idea, is that the more I run the different tracks, the more I learn about the car and what I like in the car. So that's what you're going to see in today's video. So let's get to it. Let's start off by talking a little bit about lap times. There's still plenty of speed to be found here at the track, but the reason I stopped looking for more speed is because I was already outrunning the AI on maximum difficulty, so there was really no point in trying to continue gaining more speed. Right now, my quicker laps are around 35 flat to 35 1 or 2. Anywhere in that range will be plenty good enough to get ahead and stay ahead of the AI, even on maximum difficulty. Moving on to the setup, let's start with the weight settings, as the shock settings are the same as what I've used on other tracks. Really haven't found a reason to mess around with those a little bit, although there's certainly some handling changes that can be made by adjusting those. Weight settings, left side weight of course is maxed out, as we want to do on any and all of the ovals. Front weight is at 51% and wedge is at 52%. The wedge gives us a little bit slower rotation. The higher the wedge number, the slower the rotation is going to be, and the overall stability is going to be increased in the car, or in this case, in the truck. The nose weight or front weight is really used to control, particularly on corner entry, the speed of the rotation and the amount of rotation that you get. The more front weight you put in the car, the more stable the car will be, and the slower it will want to turn, and the less overall it will want to turn. So if you're looking for stability, front weight and wedge increase, either or both of those can certainly help you out. Moving on to the spring settings, maximum 1,200 pounds on both of the front springs. That's just a number that feels good to me. If you are a little bit too loose on entry, then one of the things you can do is lower that left front spring to 1,100, maybe even 1,000 pounds, and that should help tighten up the entry for you, particularly under heavy braking. We're going to talk a little bit about driving styles and some of the adjustments you can make for different driving styles at the end, so hang with me on that. But for now, rear springs, 300 and 500, so 200 pounds of rear spring split. That is important based on driving style. That works really well for me because I like to have the car rotate with the gas pedal. I use that quite a bit to turn the car and adjust how quickly it turns, just like we were talking about with wedge and front weight. That is an adjustability I can build in to the setup so that while I'm driving, I can adjust how the car is driving by how aggressive I am with my inputs. The tire settings, left side's 25, 26 pounds, right side's 27 pounds. You can certainly play around with that and probably find some more speed, but that was handling so well, I just really didn't see the need to mess with it and even try to find more speed. Moving on to the miscellaneous settings, maximum camber in the front. Of course, you don't have to run maximum camber, but the more camber you run, it seems the more grip you get and the faster lap times you can run, so that's why it is what it is. Front sway bars at 1.15, which is a pretty traditional setting for me, particularly on the ovals and on the asphalt side of things. Dirt usually runs a little bit different for me. The track bar, left side track bar at 12 inches, right side track bar at 13 inches. The right side is a little bit higher because I wanted to help the car rotate just a little bit more from the center of the corner off when I'm under heavy throttle. So that's why the right side is a little bit higher. If the truck is overall loose, then lowering both sides of the track bar will help tighten it up. If the car is a little bit tight, then increasing the left and the right side track bar is a good way to help the car to rotate. Again, it's all which one of these you favor, whether it's adjusting the track bar or the springs or the wedge and so on. Which one of these you decide to go with as your primary adjustment is going to depend on how you drive the car. Okay, brake bias, just finishing up there in the miscellaneous settings. Brake bias, 70% seems to work good. If I get too much below that, the car wants to get a little bit too loose under heavy braking. And then if I get too much above 70%, somewhere around 75, then the car gets really tight under braking. So keep that in mind if you want to adjust how the car behaves under heavy braking. The higher the brake bias, the tighter the car is going to be, and the more it's going to want to go straight when you're heavy under the braking. Grill tape really doesn't make any difference, so I didn't really mess with it a whole lot. 40% doesn't overheat the car, and is really all I cared about. Wheel lock at 10 degrees, which is fairly standard for me on the asphalt tracks. If you want quicker steering into and off the corners, if you want the car to react quicker, then you'll want to increase the wheel lock. Steering offset is at 0.1, which is to offset some or all of the camber we have, which creates a huge amount of pull to the left, which of course pull to the left is what we want on an oval, but you don't necessarily want that on the straightaways having to turn back to the right. Gear settings, I didn't mess around with really, as far as I remember, any of the gear settings except for the rear end ratio. 4.0 works well, but of course, as always, there is plenty of room for adjustability to go up or down depending on if you want to turn more RPMs or fewer RPMs. If you increase this the rear end ratio to something like 4.11, then you're going to turn more RPMs and the car is generally going to be looser under the throttle. So if you're having trouble with the car getting out from under you under heavy throttle, then it could be that if you just back off the rear end ratio a little bit, that will help. That's not the first thing I adjust for that, but if you're in a bind and you can't think of what else to do, then lowering the RPMs by lowering the rear end ratio will certainly help with that. Now let's talk a little bit more about how aggressive or passive you are in driving the car, how deep you want to drive it, particularly into the corners. If you want to drive it in really deep, then you're going to use a lot more brake and probably a lot less throttle. The way I drive this track is to back off a little bit early, use a moderate amount of brakes, and then use the gas pedal to modulate how much the car rotates and how quickly. And what I mean by that is, particularly going into turn 1 as an example. We'll start there. Going into turn 1, I like to back off somewhere between the cone number 2, the 2 cones that you see on the right side on the catch fence as you're going into the corner, and the start of the safer barrier. Anywhere in there is going to be perfectly fine. And of course, the later you get on the brakes, the more you're going to have to get on the brakes, and probably longer you're going to have to stay with it. But you don't have to use a ton of brake here, and you can get off the brakes fairly early and let the car rotate. I generally don't come all the way out of the gas in turn 1 or in the center between turn 1 and turn 2. Again, the more I want the car to rotate, the more I back off the gas. So if you're having a lot of trouble with the car wanting to spin out going into the corner, it's probably because you're coming off the gas really quickly or a lot more than what I do. Because again, I set up the rear springs so that the car will rotate quite a bit on its own, particularly under throttle. And I use that to steer the car. So again, if you're getting really loose, particularly on corner entry, whenever you get off the gas, then it's probably because you're getting off the gas more than I am and quicker than I am. So I'm very smooth with the throttle output in this car. Now going into turn 3 is a little bit different story. You don't have to use very much brake at all going into turn 3. In fact, you can, if you lift early enough, you don't have to use any, depending on how much you want to float the car in. And I am never completely out of the gas in turn 3. I've always got the gas pedal at least 25 to 30% during that corner, simply because I don't need to lift all the way out of the gas to get the car to rotate as much as I need it to rotate. Again, that's going to vary based on how hard you drive the car, but those give you some ideas on if you're getting loose or tight, what are some of the adjustments you can make on the truck. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video and you can take some of these things and make a great setup for yourself. because learning is always the best thing. Thank you very much for joining me, and stay tuned for more as we continue NASCAR Heat 3 coverage here at Knee Pit Gaming.